The radio crackled with static at 3:47 hours, breaking the tense silence of forward operating base whiskey. Staff Sergeant Martinez adjusted his headset, expecting another routine supply request. Instead, a voice cut through the white noise, calm, measured, but carrying an undertone that made every operator in the communications tent freeze. Groundhog Base, this is Reaper 2-1. We have 8 souls in the dirt, no extraction possible. Enemy armor moving our position. Request immediate close air support over. The SEAL team leader's transmission sent ice through Martinez's veins. 8 Navy SEALs pinned down in the Kunar Valley, 60 clicks from the nearest friendly forces. The mission had been classified above Martinez's clearance level, but now these ghosts were bleeding in the mountains with nowhere to run. Reaper 2-1 Groundhog Base, stand by for available assets. Martinez's fingers flew across his console, pulling up the air tasking order. His heart sank. 2 F-16s were refueling in Bagram. The Apache squadron was grounded for maintenance. The closest fighter support was 90 minutes out. These SEALs didn't have 90 seconds. Then Martinez saw it. A single-line item buried in the overnight flight manifest. 1 A-10 Thunderbolt II, call sign Warthog 37, had launched from Kandahar 40 minutes ago on what the paperwork listed as a routine reconnaissance patrol. The pilot's name made Martinez pause. Captain Evelyn Ghost Thorne. He'd heard whispers about Ghost Thorne in the mess tent, how she'd washed out of the Thunderbirds demonstration team for attitude problems, how she requested combat assignments that other pilots avoided, how she flew her A-10 like it was an extension of her own body, pulling maneuvers that made seasoned air controllers nervous. The old-timers respected her, but the brass kept her flying milk runs and show-of-force missions. Groundhog Base Reaper 2-1, contacts closing fast, we need that air support now. The desperation bleeding through the SEAL's professional composure made Martinez's decision for him. He keyed his microphone with trembling fingers. Warthog 37 Groundhog Base, emergency close air support mission. Grid follows. He paused, knowing he was about to violate every protocol in the book by redirecting an aircraft without proper authorization. 8 friendlies in contact, heavy enemy armor, immediate assistance required. Silence stretched across the airwaves for 3 heartbeats. Then came a voice that would haunt Martinez's dreams for years to come, not because of fear, but because of the absolute certainty it carried. Groundhog Base Warthog 37, roger that, on my way. Captain Evelyn Thorne banked her. Thunderbolt II hard left, pulling 4GS as she changed course toward the emergency coordinates. The twin turbofan engines screamed behind her, their distinctive whine echoing off the cockpit walls. Below, the Afghan landscape blurred past in shades of brown and gray, punctuated by the occasional green ribbon of a river valley. Ghost, as she'd been known since her first deployment, had been flying lazy circles over Highway 1, watching for IED emplacements that never materialized. Another babysitting mission, courtesy of Colonel Brennan's opinion that female pilots belonged on low-risk sorties. She'd bitten her tongue through 6 months of supply runs and routine patrols, while her male counterparts flew the real missions. Warthog 37 Groundhog Base. Be advised, you are not authorized for this tasking. Recommend you RTB immediately. The new voice on the radio, probably some desk jockey who just noticed the deviation, made Ghost's jaw clench. She'd spent 8 years in the Air Force, 2 tours in Iraq, and countless hours proving herself in a cockpit. She wasn't about to let bureaucracy kill 8 Navy SEALs. Groundhog Base Warthog 37, negative on RTB, proceeding to assist troops in contact. Her voice remained steady, professional. Inside, her heart hammered against her ribs. Warthog 37, you are ordered to return to base immediately. This is not your assigned mission. Ghost's thumb hovered over the radio switch. Career suicide lay on one side, 8 American lives on the other. She thought of her father, Master Sergeant Robert Thorne, who died in Fallujah when she was 20. He'd always told her that the only thing that mattered in uniform was bringing your brothers and sisters home alive. She clicked off the command frequency and switched to the tactical channel. Reaper 2-1, Warthog 3-7 inbound your position, 20 minutes out. Can you mark your location? The relief in the SEAL's voice was palpable. Warthog 3-7, Reaper 2-1, popping smoke in 30 seconds. Be advised, enemy has at least 2 BTR-80s and infantry support. They're dug in good. Ghost's hands moved automatically across the weapons panel, selecting her 30 GAU-8 Avenger cannon and marking her AGM-65 Maverick missiles as ready. The A-10 had been built for exactly this mission, close air support against armored targets. She'd trained for it thousands of times, but this would be her first real chance to prove the Warthog could dance when it mattered. The mountains of the Kunar Valley rose ahead, their peaks shrouded in morning mist. Somewhere in those valleys, 8 Americans were fighting for their lives, trusting that help was coming. Ghost pushed the throttles forward, coaxing every ounce of speed from the twin turbofans. She was done being underestimated. The GPS coordinates led Ghost into a labyrinth of valleys and ridgelines that seemed to fold in on themselves like origami made of stone and shadow. At 15,000 feet, the Kunar province spread below her like a tactical map come to life. Brown ridges carved by ancient rivers, punctuated by the occasional cluster of mud brick compounds that could hide anything from shepherds to Taliban fighters. Reaper 2-1, Warthog 3-7, I have your smoke. Confirm you are the green smoke northwest of the village. That's affirmative, Warthog 3-7. Green smoke is us. Enemy positions are 200 meters south, dug in around the mosque and school compound. Ghost rolled the A-10 into a right bank, bringing the battlefield into sharp focus through her targeting pod display. The thermal imaging revealed the heat signatures of the SEALs pressed against a rocky outcropping, their body heat glowing white against the cool morning terrain. 200 meters away, larger heat blooms marked enemy vehicles and personnel positions clustered around the village buildings. Reaper 2-1, I count 2 armored vehicles, possibly BTR-80s, and approximately 15 to 20 personnel. Can you confirm no civilians in the target area? Negative civilians, Warthog. Village was evacuated 3 days ago. Anything in that compound is hostile. Ghost's finger traced across her targeting display, marking the enemy positions. The BTR-80s were positioned to provide overlapping fields of fire across the valley floor, their 14.5 machine guns capable of shredding the SEAL team if they tried to move. Infantry positions in the buildings provided additional coverage, creating a killing field with no escape routes. She pulled the A-10 into a wide orbit at 12,000 feet, staying outside the effective range of small arms fire while she planned her attack. The Warthog's titanium bathtub around the cockpit could absorb tremendous punishment, but Ghost had learned long ago that the best armor was not getting hit in the first place. Reaper 2-1, Warthog 3-7. I'm going to make my first pass from the east, hitting the northernmost BTR first. After I roll in, you'll have about 30 seconds of suppression. Can your boys be ready to displace? Roger, Warthog, will be ready. Ghost took a deep breath, feeling the familiar calm that always descended before combat. Her father had called it the zone, that mental space where training took over and everything else fell away. She rolled the A-10 onto its back and pulled the stick toward her chest, beginning her attack dive toward the valley floor where 8 Americans waited for salvation delivered at 3,900 rounds per minute. The A-10 screamed earthward at a 70-degree dive angle, its distinctive twin-engine whine building to a crescendo that echoed off the valley walls. Ghost's heads-up display painted targeting information across her field of vision, airspeed, altitude, weapon status, but her eyes remained fixed on the thermal image of the first BTR-80. The Soviet-era armored personnel carrier sat like a steel beetle beside the mosque, its turret traversing slowly as the crew searched for threats they couldn't yet see. At 8,000 feet, Ghost pulled the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon erupted with a sound like the world's largest chainsaw. 30mm depleted uranium rounds streamed toward the target at 3,900 rounds per minute, each projectile capable of punching through tank armor. The first burst walked across the BTR's hull, sparks and smoke erupting as the rounds found their mark. The armored vehicle shuddered, then exploded in a brilliant orange fireball as its ammunition cooked off. Secondary explosions rippled through the surrounding buildings as the BTR's fuel tanks ignited, sending black smoke billowing into the morning sky. Ghost pulled hard on the stick, yanking the A-10 out of its dive at 4,000 feet. G-forces pressed her into her ejection seat as she climbed and banked left, setting up for another attack run. Below, she could see muzzle flashes from the second BTR as its crew tried to engage her aircraft with their main gun. Reaper 2-1, first target destroyed, commencing attack on target 2. Outstanding shooting, Warthog. We're displacing to the ridgeline now. Ghost rolled inverted again, this time approaching from the west. The second BTR had moved from its original position, backing deeper into the village compound in an attempt to use the buildings as cover. Its crew was learning, but not fast enough. The A-10's nose came down, and Ghost felt the familiar vibration as the Avenger cannon spun up to firing speed. The targeting reticle settled over the BTR's engine compartment, and she squeezed the trigger again. This burst was longer, more deliberate. The cannon's roar filled the cockpit as depleted uranium death streamed toward the target. The BTR's rear armor disintegrated under the onslaught. Smoke poured from its engine compartment, then flames as fuel lines ruptured. The vehicle lurched forward, its driver trying desperately to escape the killing zone, but Ghost adjusted her aim and fired again. The BTR ground to a halt, then joined its companion in a spectacular explosion that shattered windows throughout the village. Reaper 2-1, both armored targets destroyed. I still show infantry positions in the buildings. Recommend you keep your heads down while I work them over. 8 Navy SEALs pressed themselves against the rocky outcropping as Ghost Thorn turned her A-10 into an instrument of precise destruction. Team leader Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rivera had been fighting in Afghanistan for 3 tours, but he'd never seen close air support this accurate, this devastating. The female pilot's voice remained calm and professional even as she rained hellfire on their attackers. Warthog 3-7, Reaper 2-1, can you hit the building with the green door? We're taking heavy fire from that position. I see it, Reaper, stand by. Rivera watched through his rifle scope as the A-10 rolled into another attack dive, this time coming in low and fast from the north. The aircraft seemed to skim the valley walls, its pilot threading the needle between terrain features that would challenge even the most experienced mountain flyers. The Warthog's distinctive silhouette, straight wings, twin-tail fins, engines mounted high on the fuselage, gave it an ungainly appearance that belied its deadly precision. The building with the green door erupted in a shower of concrete and timber as 30 rounds chewed through its walls. The Taliban fighters inside never had a chance to escape. Within seconds, their firing position had been reduced to smoking rubble. Target destroyed, Reaper. What's your status? Rivera keyed his radio, amazement bleeding through his professional demeanor. Outstanding work, Warthog. We're mobile now, moving to the extract point. Copy that. I'll stay on station until you're clear. The SEAL team bounded across the valley floor in tactical formation, each man covering his teammate's movement while Ghost circled overhead like a protective angel. Rivera had called in air support dozens of times, but he'd never felt this secure. The pilot's skill and determination had transformed what should have been a massacre into a textbook rescue operation. Reaper 2-1, this is Dustoff 7-1, inbound for extraction, 2 minutes out. The medevac helicopter's arrival meant safety, but Rivera found himself looking up at the A-10 still circling above them. He didn't even know the pilot's name, just her call sign, and the fact that she'd risked her career to save his team. In the brotherhood of special operations, such actions created bonds that transcended service branches and lasted lifetimes. Warthog 37, Reaper 21. Birds on deck, we're loading now. Thanks for keeping us breathing. Anytime, Reaper. Glad you're going home. As the helicopter lifted off with its precious cargo, Rivera caught one last glimpse of the A-10 through the cabin window. The aircraft was already banking away, heading back to whatever punishment awaited its pilot. The flight back to Kandahar gave Ghost 43 minutes to contemplate the end of her Air Force career. She disobeyed direct orders, engaged in unauthorized combat, and violated enough regulations to fill a filing cabinet. Colonel Brennan would have her wings pulled before sunset, assuming he didn't court-martial her first. The radio had been ominously silent since she'd left the Kunar Valley. No demands for her immediate return to base, no threats of disciplinary action, just the quiet hiss of static that somehow felt more menacing than shouted orders. Ghost kept her A-10 at 12,000 feet, flying a direct course home, while her mind raced through potential explanations and justifications. None of them would matter. In the modern military, following orders trumped saving lives when it came to career advancement. She'd learned that lesson repeatedly over 8 years of service, watching mediocre male pilots receive choice assignments while she flew reconnaissance missions and training sorties. The old boys network that dominated military aviation had never forgiven her for being better than them at their own game. The familiar outline of Kandahar Air Base appeared on the horizon, its runways and hangars shimmering in the afternoon heat. Ghost began her descent, running through post-flight procedures with automatic precision, while part of her mind wondered if this would be her last landing as a military pilot. The A-10 responded to her inputs like an old friend, its controls smooth and familiar beneath her hands. Kandahar Tower, Warthog 37 requesting permission to land. Warthog 37, Kandahar Tower. You are cleared for approach runway 27. Be advised, you are directed to taxi directly to the squadron operations building upon landing. The formal tone confirmed Ghost's fears. No routine post-flight debrief, no standard parking assignment. She was being summoned to face the music immediately. She acknowledged the tower's instructions and lined up for final approach, the runway growing larger in her windscreen. The A-10 touched down with barely a bounce, its rugged landing gear absorbing the impact as Ghost deployed the speed brakes and began her rollout. She turned off the active runway and followed the marshaller's signals toward the squadron building, where she could already see several staff cars parked ominously near the entrance. As Ghost shut down the engines and began her post-flight checklist, she allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. Whatever punishment awaited her, 8 Navy SEALs were alive because she'd chosen duty over orders. Her father would have been proud of that choice, even if the Air Force wasn't. The heat hit Ghost like a physical blow as she climbed down from the A-10's cockpit, the Afghan sun turning the aircraft's dark gray skin into a furnace. Her flight suit was already soaked with sweat by the time her boots touched the tarmac, but the oppressive temperature seemed insignificant compared to the wall of hostile faces waiting for her. Colonel Richard Brennan stood at the center of a small crowd of officers, his jaw clenched and his pale blue eyes radiating barely controlled fury. The man had been looking for an excuse to end Ghost's career since her arrival at Kandahar 6 months ago, and she just handed him everything he needed on a silver platter. Captain Thorne. His voice carried the kind of cold authority that could freeze blood in Arctic conditions. You will accompany me to my office immediately. Ghost snapped to attention, her heels clicking together despite the informal flight line setting. Yes, sir. The walk to the squadron building felt like a death march, with curious ground crew members stopping their work to watch the procession. Ghost kept her eyes straight ahead, refusing to show the anxiety gnawing at her stomach. She'd known this moment would come eventually. Her outspoken nature and refusal to play politics had made her too many enemies among the senior officers. Colonel Brennan's office was a shrine to military bureaucracy, its walls covered with commendations, unit photographs, and the kind of inspirational posters that meant nothing to anyone who'd actually been in combat. The colonel took his seat behind an imposing oak desk while Ghost stood at attention before him, her hands clasped behind her back. "Do you have any idea what you've done, Captain?" "I provided close air support to troops in contact, sir." "You disobeyed direct orders. You engaged in unauthorized combat operations. You violated operational security protocols and endangered a classified mission." Each word struck like a physical blow. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't have you court-martialed for insubordination." Ghost met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from the memory of 8 Navy SEALs climbing into that medevac helicopter. 8 American servicemen are alive tonight because of my actions, sir." "Your actions could have compromised the entire operation. Do you think you're the only pilot in this theater? Do you think the lives of 8 SEALs justify putting hundreds of other soldiers at risk?" The accusation stung because Ghost couldn't answer it. She didn't know what classified operation the SEALs had been supporting, didn't understand the strategic implications of her intervention. All she knew was that Americans had been dying in a valley, and she'd had the power to save them. The intercom on Brennan's desk buzzed, interrupting the confrontation. "Sir, you have a priority call on line 1. The tension in Ghost's shoulders began to ease as she stood outside Colonel Brennan's office, waiting for permission to enter. Through the closed door, she could hear the muffled sound of his voice, though the words were indistinct. Whatever conversation was taking place had lasted nearly 20 minutes, an eternity in military time when a superior officer was supposedly preparing to end her career. The door finally opened, and Brennan's expression had undergone a subtle but significant transformation. The raw fury had been replaced by something closer to confusion, with perhaps a hint of grudging respect lurking beneath the surface. "Captain Thorne, please take a seat." Ghost settled into the leather chair across from Brennan's desk, her military bearing still perfect but her internal alarm bells ringing at this unexpected courtesy. In 8 years of military service, she'd learned that sudden politeness from superior officers usually preceded either very good news or very bad news. "That was Admiral Richardson at CENTCOM," Brennan began, his voice carefully neutral. "It seems your unauthorized mission this morning has generated considerable interest at the highest levels of command." Ghost remained silent, waiting for the other shoe to drop. "The SEAL team you extracted was conducting a classified reconnaissance mission in preparation for a major counterterrorism operation. Their intelligence was time-critical, and their loss would have compromised months of planning." Brennan paused, studying a document on his desk. "According to the team leader's after-action report, your intervention saved not only 8 lives, but potentially hundreds more." The words hit Ghost like a physical impact, leaving her momentarily speechless. She'd acted on instinct and training, never considering the broader strategic implications of her decision. "Furthermore," Brennan continued, "your demonstration of the A-10's capabilities in close terrain has impressed certain people in the Pentagon. It seems there are those who believe female pilots might have unique advantages in certain tactical situations." Ghost felt a flicker of hope, quickly suppressed. Military bureaucracy had disappointed her too many times to trust in sudden reversals of fortune. "However," and there was the inevitable catch, "your flagrant disregard for the chain of command cannot be overlooked. You placed yourself above properly constituted authority and made decisions that were not yours to make." The familiar weight of impending punishment settled on Ghost's shoulders like a lead blanket. "Therefore, You are hereby transferred to the 354th Fighter Squadron at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base, effective immediately. You'll be flying combat missions exclusively, reporting directly to Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell. Ghost blinked, certain she'd misheard. Davis-Monthan was home to the largest A-10 squadron in the Air Force, and Sarah Mitchell was a legend among Warthog pilots. "Sorry." "Congratulations, Captain. You're getting exactly what you wanted." 3 weeks later, Ghost stood on the flight line at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base in Arizona, watching a formation of A-10 Thunderbolts taxi past in the pre-dawn darkness. The desert air was crisp and clean, carrying the familiar scent of jet fuel and hydraulic fluid that had become as comforting as home to her over the years. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Mitchell approached from the squadron building, her stride confident and purposeful. At 42, Mitchell was everything Ghost aspired to become, a combat veteran who'd earned respect through skill and determination rather than political maneuvering. Her reputation preceded her: 3 deployments to Iraq, 2 to Afghanistan, and more air medals than most pilots accumulated in entire careers. "Captain Thorne." Mitchell's handshake was firm, her gray eyes direct and assessing. "I've been reading your file. Quite the adventure you had in the Kunar Valley." "Yes, ma'am. I hope it won't affect my performance here." "Affect your performance?" Mitchell's laugh was genuine, carrying no trace of mockery. "Captain, what you did in Afghanistan is exactly why I requested your transfer. This squadron flies real missions against real targets, and we need pilots who understand that sometimes saving lives matters more than following regulations." They walked together toward Ghost's assigned aircraft, tail number 800247, its nose art depicting a grinning skull wearing aviator sunglasses. The A-10 looked exactly like what it was: a flying gun platform built around the massive GAU-8 cannon, designed to destroy tanks and keep infantry alive. "Tell me about your tactical philosophy," Mitchell said, as they completed the pre-flight walk-around inspection. "Ma'am." In the valley, 8 SEALs pinned down, 2 BTRs providing overwatch, infantry in prepared positions. "How did you approach the problem?" Ghost considered the question as she checked the aircraft's control surfaces. "The armored vehicles were the primary threat, ma'am. Eliminate them first, and the infantry becomes manageable. I used terrain masking to avoid detection during my initial approach, then attacked from multiple vectors to prevent the enemy from establishing effective defensive fires." "And the risk to your aircraft?" "Secondary consideration. The mission was to save those SEALs, not to bring my airplane home in pristine condition." Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the attitude we need in this squadron. Too many pilots treat their aircraft like precious jewels instead of the tools they are. The A-10 was built to take damage and keep fighting. Our job is to use that capability to keep American soldiers alive." As Ghost climbed into the cockpit for her first mission with the 354th, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: the sense of belonging somewhere that valued her skills rather than questioning her presence. 6 months into her assignment with the 354th Fighter Squadron, Ghost had established herself as one of the unit's most reliable pilots. The missions were everything she'd hoped for: close air support for troops in contact, convoy escort duties, and armed reconnaissance flights over hostile territory. Each sortie presented unique challenges that demanded split-second decision-making and precise weapons employment. The squadron's culture was unlike anything Ghost had experienced in her Air Force career. Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell had assembled a team of pilots who shared a common philosophy: mission accomplishment trumped personal glory, and every decision should be evaluated through the lens of saving American lives. Politics and bureaucracy took a backseat to tactical proficiency and mutual trust. Ghost's reputation had evolved from that of a problem child to a pilot other aviators specifically requested for difficult missions. Her call sign had taken on new meaning. She appeared when needed, struck with devastating effectiveness, and vanished before enemy forces could respond. The nickname that had once implied invisibility now suggested something far more potent: the ability to be everywhere American soldiers needed air support. Warthog 4-2, this is Groundhog 7. We have troops in contact, grid 37 Tango Quebec 9542. Friendlies marked with red smoke, enemy positions 200 meters north. Ghost acknowledged the controller's transmission and banked her A-10 toward the coordinates, her tactical display updating automatically with target information. Below, the rugged terrain of eastern Afghanistan stretched endlessly in all directions, its brown ridges and valleys hiding countless potential threats. The mission was routine by her standards: a convoy ambush with enemy fighters using improvised explosive devices and small arms fire to pin down a supply column. What made it significant was the radio chatter she'd been monitoring for the past hour. Word was spreading through military communication networks about the pilot who'd saved 8 SEALs in the Kunar Valley. Her actions that morning had become legend, growing with each retelling. Groundhog 7, Warthog 4-2. I have your red smoke in enemy positions. Commencing attack now. As Ghost rolled into her attack dive, she reflected on how much her life had changed since that fateful morning when she'd chosen to disobey orders. The decision had cost her nothing, but gained her everything: the respect of her peers, meaningful missions, and the knowledge that her skills were being used to their fullest potential. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life, and another group of American soldiers would go home safely because Ghost Thorne had learned to trust her instincts over regulations. The secure video conference linked Davis-Monthan Air Force Base to the Pentagon, creating a digital bridge between the Arizona desert and the corridors of military power in Washington. Ghost sat rigidly at attention in Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell's office, still uncertain why she'd been summoned to participate in a briefing with generals and admirals whose names appeared regularly in military publications. On the large monitor, General Patricia Harrison, the Air Force's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, leaned forward in her chair. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her blue eyes carried the intensity that had made her the highest-ranking female officer in the service. Captain Thorne, your actions in Afghanistan have generated considerable discussion at the highest levels of military leadership. The precision and effectiveness of your close air support missions have become case studies in tactical aviation. Ghost felt her pulse quicken. Thank you, ma'am. However, what interests us more is your decision-making process under pressure. You've consistently demonstrated the ability to assess complex tactical situations and respond appropriately without extensive guidance from ground controllers or higher headquarters. Admiral Richardson appeared on a split screen from CENTCOM headquarters in Tampa. Captain, we're developing new concepts for close air support in denied environments, situations where traditional command and control structures may be disrupted or unavailable. We need pilots who can operate independently while maintaining tactical effectiveness. The conversation that followed revealed a classified program designed to enhance close air support capabilities for Special Operations Forces. Ghost would be transferred to a joint training center where she'd work directly with SEAL teams, Delta Force operators, and other elite units to develop new tactics and procedures. The program is voluntary, General Harrison explained, but it would accelerate your career significantly. You'd be promoted to major immediately and given command of a specialized flight within the program. Ghost glanced at Lieutenant Colonel Mitchell, who nodded encouragingly. The opportunity represented everything she'd worked toward: meaningful missions, command responsibility, and the chance to influence how the military employed close air support in future conflicts. I accept, ma'am. Excellent. You'll report to Nellis Air Force Base in 30 days for initial briefings. Captain Thorne, this program will be challenging in ways you haven't experienced before. The stakes will be higher, the missions more complex, and the margin for error virtually non-existent. As the video conference ended, Ghost realized her career had reached an inflection point. The choice she'd made in the Kunar Valley had opened doors she'd never imagined possible. The Nevada test and training range stretched beyond the horizon in all directions, its desolate landscape providing the perfect backdrop for military exercises that pushed equipment and personnel to their absolute limits. Ghost's A-10 cruised at 15,000 feet above the vast emptiness, its engines providing a steady vibration through the airframe as she monitored multiple radio frequencies for the exercise controller's instructions. Major Evelyn Thorne, her promotion had become official 2 weeks earlier, was leading a four-ship formation of A-10s in the most complex training scenario she'd ever encountered. Below them, a joint task force of Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and Air Force Special Operations Command personnel were conducting a simulated hostage rescue mission in a mock urban environment constructed specifically for this purpose. The scenario was deliberately overwhelming. Multiple enemy positions with overlapping fields of fire, civilian hostages mixed with hostile combatants, and time constraints that demanded perfect coordination between ground and air elements. Previous iterations of the exercise had resulted in unacceptable casualty rates among the simulated friendly forces. Reaper 1-1, Warthog 6-1. We have multiple targets of opportunity, but I need confirmation on civilian locations before we can engage. The SEAL team leader's voice carried the controlled tension that Ghost recognized from real combat operations. The Special Operations community had embraced her presence in the program after word spread about her actions in Afghanistan, but they still tested her capabilities relentlessly. Warthog 6-1, Reaper 1-1. Buildings 2 and 4 are clear for engagement. Building 3 still has possible hostages on the second floor. Ghost studied the target area through her targeting pod, the thermal imaging revealing heat signatures throughout the complex. The exercise designers had used sophisticated mannequins and heating elements to create realistic target discrimination challenges that pushed pilots' skills to their limits. Copy Reaper, engaging Building 2 with 30 Mike. The GAU-8 cannon erupted in a precisely controlled burst, the depleted uranium rounds obliterating the designated target structure. Ghost immediately shifted her attention to Building 4, where laser-guided training rounds simulated enemy rocket-propelled grenade positions. Excellent shooting, Warthog 6-1. All hostile positions neutralized, 0 civilian casualties. The exercise controller's assessment marked another successful mission in what had become a string of flawless performances. Ghost's ability to provide accurate fires in complex environments had exceeded all expectations, earning recognition from the Special Operations community that valued results over politics. As her formation climbed away from the target area, Ghost reflected on how profoundly her career had changed since that morning in the Kunar Valley. The officers' club at Nellis Air Force Base buzzed with conversation as Ghost entered, her flight suit still bearing the sweat stains and creases that marked a pilot returning from a challenging mission. The familiar atmosphere of military aviators unwinding after a day of flying felt comfortable despite the club's unfamiliar layout and decor. She'd been at Nellis for 3 months now, long enough to establish routines but not long enough to feel completely at home. The specialized training program operated in a different world from conventional Air Force units, smaller groups, more focused missions, and a level of operational security that kept her isolated from the broader base community. Major Thorne. The voice belonged to Colonel James Patterson, the program director, a soft-spoken officer whose quiet demeanor concealed one of the most brilliant tactical minds in the Air Force. Join me for a moment. They settled into a corner booth away from the main crowd, Patterson nursing a beer while Ghost opted for water. She'd learned early in her career that alcohol and aviation were a dangerous combination, even during off-duty hours. The evaluations from today's exercise were exceptional, Patterson began. You're achieving target discrimination accuracy rates that exceed our modeling predictions by significant margins. Ghost felt a familiar wariness. Excessive praise from senior officers usually preceded unwelcome assignments or additional responsibilities. However, I'm concerned about your integration with the special operations community. Some of the team leaders feel you're distant. The observation stung because it carried more than a grain of truth. Ghost had learned to maintain professional barriers as a survival mechanism during her early Air Force career, when too much familiarity with male colleagues had been interpreted as weakness or inappropriate behavior. Sir, I maintain appropriate professional relationships with all personnel. Professional, yes, but these men need to trust you completely, and trust requires more than professional competence. They need to know that you understand their culture and share their commitment. Patterson leaned forward, his expression serious. Major, you've proven yourself as a pilot beyond any reasonable doubt. Now you need to prove yourself as a leader and teammate. The special operations community doesn't care about your gender, but they do care about your character. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, touching on leadership philosophy, team dynamics, and the unique challenges of joint operations. Ghost left the club with new perspective on her role in the program, understanding that technical proficiency alone wouldn't be sufficient for the responsibilities ahead. That night, she drafted personal notes to each of the special operations team leaders she'd worked with, requesting individual meetings to discuss how she could better support their missions. The handwritten responses that appeared in her mailbox over the following days marked the beginning of relationships that would define the rest of her military career. The C-130 transport aircraft's cargo bay was cramped and noisy, filled with the distinctive sounds of military equipment rattling against tie-down straps and the constant drone of 4 turboprop engines. Ghost sat wedged between Master Chief Petty Officer Daniel Rodriguez and Staff Sergeant Kevin Torch Thompson, part of a 12-person joint task force heading toward what the briefing materials euphemistically called a developing situation in Syria. The mission represented everything the specialized training program had been designed to accomplish: rapid deployment of integrated air-ground teams to respond to time-sensitive targets. Intelligence indicated that a high-value terrorist leader was meeting with weapons suppliers in a remote compound near the Turkish border, presenting a narrow window of opportunity for capture or elimination. Ghost's role would be different from her previous combat experiences. Instead of providing traditional close air support from altitude, she would be operating from a forward airstrip just 20 kilometers from the target area, ready to provide immediate assistance if the ground team encountered unexpected resistance. Major, you ever work a snatch and grab before? Rodriguez's question carried genuine curiosity rather than skepticism. The SEAL Master Chief had earned his reputation during 3 tours in Iraq and 2 in Afghanistan, accumulating enough combat experience to fill several careers. Negative, Master Chief. This is my first direct action mission with ground forces. Different animal than what you're used to. We go in quiet, get our boy, and get out before anyone knows we were there. If everything goes according to plan, you'll never leave the ground. Torch Thompson laughed grimly. When's the last time anything went according to plan? The conversation that followed provided Ghost with insights into special operations, culture that no amount of training could have conveyed. These men lived in a world where Murphy's Law wasn't just a theoretical concept. It was an operational reality that shaped every aspect of mission planning and execution. As the C-130 began its descent toward the classified forward operating base, Ghost found herself thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 2 years earlier, She'd been flying milk runs in Afghanistan, dismissed by her superiors as a competent but unremarkable pilot. Now, she was part of an elite team preparing to conduct one of the military's most challenging mission types. The change hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. Every step forward had required proving herself again and again, demonstrating not just technical skill, but the judgment and character that special operations demanded. The aircraft touched down with a jarring impact, and Ghost prepared herself for what could be the most important mission of her career. The forward operating base consisted of little more than a dirt airstrip, a handful of prefabricated buildings, and enough fuel bladders to support short-duration operations. Ghost's A-10 sat alone at the end of the runway, its gray camouflage paint scheme making it nearly invisible against the desert landscape in the pre-dawn darkness. She'd completed her pre-flight inspection by moonlight, checking every system and weapon with methodical precision. The aircraft carried a light combat load, enough ordnance to provide effective close air support without the weight penalty that would limit its maneuverability in the confined terrain near the target area. Warthog 6-1, Reaper 1-1, we're 10 minutes out from the objective. Everything still quiet on your end. Ghost keyed her radio from the cockpit where she sat ready to start engines at a moment's notice. Reaper 1-1, all quiet. Weather is clear, winds calm. I can be airborne in 3 minutes if you need me. Copy that. Hopefully we won't, but it's good knowing you're there. The radio fell silent as the SEAL team approached their target, maintaining communication security that would prevent enemy forces from detecting their presence. Ghost monitored multiple frequencies simultaneously, listening for any indication that the mission was encountering complications. 20 minutes passed without communication. According to the mission timeline, the team should have been inside the compound by now, locating and securing their high-value target. The silence could indicate perfect execution of the plan, or it could mean something had gone catastrophically wrong. Ghost's hands moved across the engine start sequence, bringing both turbofans online without receiving specific instructions to do so. Her instincts, honed by years of combat experience, were telling her that the quiet was about to be shattered. Warthog 6-1, Reaper 1-1, we are compromised, taking fire from multiple positions. Immediate close air support requested. The urgency in Rodriguez's voice cut through the static like a blade. Ghost's fingers flew across the cockpit switches, bringing all aircraft systems online as she released the parking brake and began her takeoff roll. Reaper 1-1, Warthog 6-1 is airborne. Give me your position and threat assessment. We're inside the compound northwest corner, taking fire from the main building and at least 2 outbuildings. Unknown number of hostiles, but they've got us pinned down good. Ghost pulled the A-10 into a climbing turn, gaining altitude while flying toward the target coordinates. The compound appeared ahead as a cluster of lights and muzzle flashes in the darkness, clearly visible against the surrounding desert. I have eyes on target, marking friendly positions now. The infrared strobe attached to Rodriguez's equipment appeared as a bright beacon in Ghost's targeting display, allowing her to identify the SEAL team's location with precision. Enemy positions revealed themselves through the heat signatures of their weapons and the distinct patterns of their defensive fires. Ghost rolled into her first attack run, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether 12 American warriors went home alive or became casualties of a mission gone wrong. The GAU-8 cannon spun up to firing speed as she lined up her first target, muscle memory and training taking over as conscious thought gave way to pure instinct. The 13 rounds tore through the night like deadly meteors, each depleted uranium projectile carrying enough kinetic energy to punch through concrete walls and steel reinforcement. Ghost's first burst silenced a machine gun position that had been raking the courtyard where the SEALs were trapped, the enemy weapon disappearing in a shower of sparks and debris. Outstanding shooting, Warthog. That was danger close and perfect placement. Ghost was already banking for her second attack run, this time targeting a sniper position in the compound's main building. The thermal imaging revealed the distinctive heat signature of a human form behind a window, muzzle flashes, indicating ongoing engagement with the ground team. The GAU-8's roar echoed across the desert as another precisely aimed burst eliminated the threat. Concrete chunks rained down from the building's facade as 30 rounds chewed through the wall, transforming the sniper's position into rubble. Reaper 1-1, can you displace to the vehicle compound? I'm going to work over the remaining buildings. Roger Warthog, moving now. Ghost watched through her targeting pod as the 12-man team bounded across the courtyard in perfect tactical formation, each operator covering his teammates' movement while she provided overwatch from above. Their discipline under fire impressed even her seasoned perspective. These men moved like a single organism, anticipating each other's actions and responding to threats with fluid coordination. The remaining enemy positions fell quickly under Ghost's methodical attack. Each gun emplacement, each sniper hide, each defensive position was systematically destroyed by precise cannon fire that never came closer than 50 meters to friendly forces. The A-10's legendary accuracy became a surgical instrument in Ghost's hands, delivering exactly the right amount of firepower to exactly the right locations. Warthog 6-1, we have our package and are moving to the extract point. Can you provide top cover during our movement? Affirmative, Reaper. I'll stay overhead until you're clear. As Ghost orbited the compound, watching the SEAL team's tactical withdrawal through her targeting system, she felt the familiar satisfaction that came from a mission executed flawlessly. 12 Americans were alive and walking away from what could have been a disaster, carrying with them a high-value target whose intelligence would save countless lives in future operations. But more than that, she'd proven herself once again to the special operations community, not as a female pilot trying to fit into a male-dominated world, but as a warrior whose skills transcended gender or service branch boundaries. The extraction helicopter appeared on the horizon, its rotor signature visible in Ghost's night vision system. Soon the ground team would be airborne and heading home, another successful mission added to their collective resume. Ghost remained on station until the helicopter disappeared into the darkness, then turned her A-10 back toward the forward operating base. As she flew through the pre-dawn sky, she couldn't shake the feeling that tonight had been a turning point, not just for the mission, but for her entire career. The debriefing room at the classified facility outside Las Vegas resembled a corporate conference room more than a military briefing space, its polished table and comfortable chairs creating an atmosphere that encouraged open discussion rather than formal reporting. Ghost sat across from a panel of senior officers whose combined experience represented decades of special operations leadership. Colonel Patterson occupied the center chair, flanked by Navy Captain Rebecca Walsh from Naval Special Warfare Command and Army Colonel Michael Torres from the 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. The diversity of their backgrounds reflected the joint nature of the program that Ghost had become an integral part of over the past year. Major Thorne, Captain Walsh began, your performance in Syria exceeded all expectations. The precision of your fires and your coordination with ground forces represents a new standard for joint operations. Ghost maintained her professional composure despite the pride swelling in her chest. Thank you, ma'am. The ground team made my job easy by providing excellent target designation and maintaining clear communications throughout the engagement. Colonel Torres leaned forward, his weathered features reflecting 3 decades of special operations experience. What impresses us most is your decision-making under pressure. You initiated the attack sequence before receiving specific authorization, based solely on your assessment of the tactical situation. Sir, the team was taking effective fire. Waiting for formal clearance would have resulted in American casualties. Exactly the kind of judgment we need in future operations, Patterson interjected. Major, we're expanding the program based on the success we've achieved over the past 18 months. You'll be promoted to lieutenant colonel and given command of a new Joint Close Air Support Squadron specifically designed to work with Special Operations Forces. The magnitude of the opportunity struck Ghost like a physical blow. Squadron command was the pinnacle of military aviation careers, typically reserved for officers with impeccable records and strong political connections. She'd earned the position through combat performance and tactical innovation rather than bureaucratic maneuvering. The squadron will be based at Hurlburt Field in Florida, Walsh continued, working directly with Air Force Special Operations Command and Naval Special Warfare Units. You'll have 16 A-10s and some of the best pilots in the Air Force. Additionally, Torres added, you'll be developing new tactics and procedures for close air support in denied environments. The lessons learned from your combat experiences will become doctrine for the entire special operations community. As the briefing continued, Ghost realized her career had evolved far beyond anything she'd imagined when she'd first climbed into an A-10 cockpit. The pilot who'd been dismissed as a troublemaker was now being entrusted with responsibilities that would shape the future of military aviation. The meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations, but Ghost's mind was already focused on the challenges ahead. Command brought opportunities, but also enormous responsibilities. The lives of her pilots and the success of countless missions would depend on her leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Evelyn "Ghost" Thorne stood on the flight line at Hurlburt Field, watching her pilots conduct their morning briefings in the pre-dawn darkness. The 27th Special Operations Squadron had been operational for 6 months, and its reputation was already spreading throughout the military community like wildfire. 16 A-10 Thunderbolts sat in perfect alignment, their distinctive silhouettes creating an imposing display of air power designed specifically for close air support missions. Each aircraft bore the squadron's unique insignia, a ghostly figure emerging from storm clouds, carrying lightning bolts in both hands. The symbolism wasn't subtle, but it accurately represented the unit's mission and capabilities. Ghost's pilots were hand-picked volunteers from across the Air Force, each selected for their combat experience, tactical proficiency, and ability to work effectively with ground forces. They represented the elite of A-10 aviation, men and women who'd proven themselves in Iraq, Afghanistan, and other classified operations around the world. The morning's mission would take 4 aircraft to a training range in North Carolina, where they'd work with a Marine Expeditionary Unit conducting amphibious assault exercises. The complexity of coordinating air support with naval forces, ground troops, and helicopter assets challenged even experienced pilots, but Ghost's squadron had developed innovative techniques that dramatically improved effectiveness. Colonel, we're ready for final briefing. Major Rick Hammer Davidson approached from the squadron operations building, his flight suit already stained with coffee and carrying the inevitable collection of charts, checklists, and communication cards that defined military aviation. Davidson had been Ghost's deputy commander since the squadron's formation, a veteran of 4 combat deployments who'd initially harbored doubts about serving under a female commanding officer. Those doubts had evaporated during their first joint exercise, when Ghost's tactical leadership and flight skills had earned his complete respect and loyalty. The briefing room buzzed with controlled energy as the 4-pilot flight reviewed weather conditions, communications procedures, and tactical scenarios they might encounter during the exercise. Ghost listened to the discussion with half her attention while mentally reviewing the broader strategic implications of their training. The 27th Squadron represented more than just another military unit. It was proof that the concepts she'd helped develop over the past 3 years could be implemented on a larger scale. Every successful mission validated the investment in joint operations and demonstrated the value of integrating air and ground forces at the tactical level. "Any questions about the mission?" Ghost asked as the briefing concluded. The silence that followed indicated her pilot's confidence in their preparation. These men and women had learned to trust her judgment completely, just as she'd learned to trust theirs. The mutual respect that defined their relationships had been forged through shared challenges and proven effectiveness in increasingly complex operations. As they walked toward their aircraft, Ghost reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 8 years earlier, she'd been a frustrated captain flying routine missions and fighting for recognition. Now she commanded one of the Air Force's most elite squadrons, with responsibility for developing tactics that would influence military operations for decades to come. The transformation hadn't been achieved through political maneuvering or bureaucratic success. It had come from a willingness to risk everything for the lives of 8 Navy SEALs in a valley in Afghanistan. The afternoon sun blazed down on the North Carolina coast as Ghost's A-10 circled at 8,000 feet, watching the amphibious assault unfold below. Marine landing craft approached the beach in tactical formation, while AV-8B Harrier jets provided top cover and attack helicopters engaged simulated enemy positions inland. The exercise scenario was deliberately challenging, a contested landing against prepared defenses, with civilian populations nearby and restrictive rules of engagement that required precise target identification. Ghost's four-ship flight was tasked with providing close air support during the most critical phase of the operation, when the Marines would be most vulnerable to counterattack. Reaper 6, Warthog 1-1. We have 4 aircraft on station, full combat load, ready to support as required. The Marine ground controller's voice carried the distinctive accent of the Deep South, his calm professionalism masking the complexity of coordinating multiple aircraft types in confined airspace. Warthog 1-1, Reaper 6, stand by for tasking. We've got simulated enemy armor moving toward the landing zone from the northwest. Ghost's tactical display updated with target information as her pilots maneuvered into attack positions. The exercise directors had positioned remotely controlled vehicles to simulate enemy tanks and armored personnel carriers, creating realistic targets that would challenge pilot skills without endangering human life. Warthog 1-2, you have the northern group. 1-3 and 1-4 take the vehicles approaching from the west. I'll handle the southern targets. The coordinated attack that followed demonstrated the tactical innovations Ghost Squadron had developed over months of intensive training. Instead of individual aircraft making separate attack runs, her pilots engaged simultaneously from different directions, overwhelming the simulated defenses and providing mutual support throughout the engagement. Outstanding, outstanding. The Marine controller's enthusiasm was genuine. All targets destroyed, 0 friendly fire incidents, textbook execution. As Ghost's flight reformed and began their return to Hurlburt Field, she monitored the radio chatter from other aircraft involved in the exercise. The comments were universally positive. The 27th Squadron's performance had impressed even the most experienced military aviators. But for Ghost, the real measure of success wasn't the praise from exercise controllers or the perfect scores on evaluation forms. It was the knowledge that her pilots had once again demonstrated their ability to provide precise, effective close air support that would save American lives in real combat situations. The flight home gave her time to contemplate the responsibilities that came with command. Every tactical decision, every training evolution, every personnel action she made would ultimately be judged by how well it prepared her squadron for the day when they would be called upon to fight for real. That day was coming sooner than anyone expected. The secure telephone in Ghost's office rang at 3:47 hours, jolting her from the light sleep that had become her normal state since taking command of the squadron. 6 months of 18-hour days and constant operational pressure had taught her to rest whenever possible, but always with one ear tuned to the communications that could summon her pilots to war. Colonel Thorne. Her voice was immediately alert despite the early hour. "Ma'am, this is the operations center. We have a priority one tasking. You need to be here immediately." Ghost was dressed and moving before the duty officer finished speaking. Priority one meant real-world operations, not training exercises or routine deployments. Somewhere in the world, American forces were in trouble, and the 27th Squadron was being called to help. The Squadron Operations Center hummed with activity, as intelligence analysts prepared briefing materials and flight planners calculated fuel requirements and transit routes. Ghost's pilots began arriving within minutes of her call, their response time reflecting the constant state of readiness that defined special operations aviation. Major Davidson met her at the briefing room door, his expression grim. "Ma'am, we've got Americans under siege in Somalia. A joint task force conducting counterterrorism operations has been surrounded by militia forces. They need immediate close air support to break contact and reach their extraction point." The mission briefing that followed revealed a situation that tested every tactical concept Ghost Squadron had developed. The American forces, a mix of Navy SEALs, Army Rangers, and intelligence operatives, were trapped in an urban environment where enemy fighters blended seamlessly with civilian populations. Traditional close air support tactics would be inadequate. Success would require the precision and discrimination that only the most skilled pilots could provide. "Time on target is 4 hours from now," the intelligence officer concluded. "Weather is clear, but we'll be operating in daylight with limited refueling options." Ghost studied the aerial photographs of Mogadishu, its dense urban landscape evoking memories of Black Hawk Down, and the lessons learned from that tragedy 25 years earlier. The city's narrow streets and closely packed buildings would challenge even her most experienced pilots, requiring split-second decisions that balanced mission success against civilian casualties. "Questions?" Ghost asked her assembled pilots. The silence that followed wasn't uncertainty. It was the calm confidence of warriors preparing for battle. These men and women had trained for exactly this type of mission, and they were ready to prove themselves in the crucible of combat. "Gentlemen, ladies," Ghost said as the briefing concluded, "this is what we've been preparing for. 12 Americans are counting on us to bring them home alive. Let's not disappoint them." As her pilots filed out to begin their pre-flight preparations, Ghost felt the familiar mixture of anticipation and responsibility that preceded every combat mission. In 4 hours, the 27th Squadron would face its first real test, and the outcome would determine whether the innovative tactics they'd developed could save American lives in the chaos of urban warfare. The mission would also test whether Ghost herself had truly earned the respect and authority that came with squadron command, or whether she was simply another officer who looked good on paper but failed when lives hung in the balance. The 4 A-10s of Ghost's formation flew through the pre-dawn darkness over the Indian Ocean, their navigation lights extinguished, and their radar signatures minimized through careful flight planning and electronic countermeasures. The 8-hour transit from Hurlburt Field to the Horn of Africa had been accomplished through a series of aerial refuelings that tested both pilot endurance and aircraft systems. Ghost occupied the lead position, her aircraft loaded with a mixed ordnance package designed for urban combat operations, 250-pound GPS-guided bombs for precise strikes against buildings, and the GAU-8 cannon for close-in work where collateral damage had to be minimized. Her 3 wingmen carried similar loads, each weapon selected for its ability to engage specific target types while reducing the risk to civilian populations. Warthog 1-1, this is Reaper Control. Your package is 15 minutes out from the objective area. Be advised, Friendly forces are in contact at multiple locations throughout the city. The controller's voice carried the tension that accompanied real-world operations, where American lives hung in the balance. Ghost acknowledged the transmission while reviewing her tactical display, which showed the complex urban environment where 12 special operations personnel were fighting for survival. Reaper Control, Warthog 1-1. Request current tactical situation. Friendlies are surrounded in a 3-story building in the Bakara Market District. Estimated 200 hostiles in the immediate area, with more reinforcements arriving from the south and east. Heavy weapons include RPGs and crew-served machine guns. Ghost's blood chilled at the numbers. 200 enemy fighters against 12 Americans in an urban environment was a nightmare scenario that could only end in massacre without immediate intervention. Her squadron's arrival might be the difference between a successful extraction and another military disaster that would haunt the nation for decades. Warthog flight switched to tactical frequency. We're going to work. The formation descended through 10,000 feet as the lights of Mogadishu appeared ahead, a sprawling urban complex of over 2 million people where distinguishing friend from foe would require every ounce of skill Ghost's pilots possessed. The morning sun was beginning to rise over the eastern horizon, providing the visibility necessary for precision attacks while also making the A-10s more vulnerable to ground fire. Warthog 1-1, Reaper 7. We have you in sight, marking our position with infrared strobe now. Ghost's targeting pod immediately detected the friendly beacon, a bright star in the thermal display that indicated the exact location of the trapped Americans. Around that position, the thermal signatures of enemy fighters were clearly visible as they moved through the narrow streets and building complexes that define the urban battlefield. The next few minutes would determine whether Ghost's years of training, innovation, and leadership had prepared her squadron for the ultimate test of military aviation, saving American lives in the face of overwhelming odds. Ghost rolled her A-10 into a shallow dive, lining up her first target through the aircraft's sophisticated targeting system. Below, the thermal imagery revealed a crew-served machine gun position on a rooftop approximately 300 meters from the trapped Americans, its crew systematically raking the building where the Special Operations team had taken refuge. Warthog 1-2, take the RPG team in the alley northwest of Friendlies. 1-3, you have the technical vehicle approaching from the east. 1-4, stand by for tasking. The coordinated attack that followed represented the culmination of everything Ghost's squadron had learned about urban close air support. For 250-pound GPS-guided bombs struck their targets simultaneously, the precision-guided munitions eliminating specific threats without causing the collateral damage that would have resulted from larger weapons. Outstanding, direct hits on all targets. The enthusiasm in the ground controller's voice was unmistakable. Enemy fire has decreased significantly. Friendlies are preparing to move to the extraction point. But Ghost knew the battle was far from over. Her tactical display showed new heat signatures appearing throughout the surrounding area as additional enemy reinforcements arrived to join the fight. The successful airstrikes had bought time for the trapped Americans, but they would need continuous protection during their movement through the hostile urban environment. Reaper 7, Warthog 1-1, what's your route to the extraction point? We're moving south through the market district, then west to the soccer stadium. Estimated movement time is 20 minutes. 20 minutes of continuous close air support in an urban environment would push Ghost's pilots to their absolute limits. Ammunition would run low, fuel consumption would increase due to low-altitude maneuvering, and the risk of enemy surface-to-air missiles would grow with each passing minute. Copy, Reaper 7. Will provide continuous overwatch during your movement. As Ghost banked her A-10 for another attack run, she felt the weight of command settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. 12 American warriors were depending on her leadership, and her squadron's skill to guide them through the deadliest urban battlefield in the world. Failure wasn't an option. It never had been, and it never would be. The GAU-8 cannon spun up to firing speed as Ghost identified her next target, and the distinctive roar of the Avenger filled the morning sky over Mogadishu. The 20 minutes that followed tested every aspect of Ghost's tactical leadership and her pilot's combat skills. The 12-man Special Operations Team moved through Mogadishu's chaotic streets like ghosts themselves, bounding from cover to cover, while Ghost's A-10s provided a protective umbrella of precisely delivered firepower. Each city block presented new challenges: enemy fighters emerging from buildings to engage the Americans, technical vehicles loaded with heavy weapons attempting to block escape routes, and crowds of civilians whose presence complicated every targeting decision. Ghost's pilots responded with surgical precision, their weapons eliminating threats while avoiding the collateral damage that could turn a rescue mission into an international incident. Warthog 1-3 is Winchester. Major Sarah Steele Martinez's transmission indicated she'd expended all ordnance, leaving her with only the GAU-8 cannon for future engagements. Roger Steele, RTB for rearm and refuel, 1-4 move up to support position. The ammunition management became a critical factor as the running battle continued through the urban landscape. Ghost rotated her aircraft through different attack positions, ensuring continuous coverage while conserving ordnance for the most critical moments. Reaper 7, Warthog 1-1. I show your 2 blocks from the extraction point. Heavy enemy concentration ahead of your position. Looks like they're trying to set up a blocking position. Roger Warthog, we see them. Can you clear our path? Ghost's targeting pod revealed approximately 30 enemy fighters establishing defensive positions around the soccer stadium, where the extraction helicopters would land. The enemy had learned from the morning's fighting, positioning themselves in locations that would make precision bombing difficult without risking civilian casualties. Warthog flight, this is going to require low-level gun runs. Follow my lead and watch your spacing. Ghost pushed her A-10 into a steep dive, descending to just 500 feet above the city streets as she lined up the GAU-8 cannon on the enemy positions. At this altitude, her aircraft was vulnerable to small arms fire and RPGs, but accuracy would be maximized and collateral damage minimized. The cannon erupted in a devastating stream of 30 depleted uranium rounds, each burst precisely aimed at specific enemy positions. Ghost's wingmen followed in sequence, their coordinated attack eliminating the blocking force in less than 2 minutes of intense combat. Path is clear, moving to extraction point now. As the Special Operations Team reached the soccer stadium and linked up with their extraction helicopters, Ghost climbed her battered A-10 back to a safer altitude. Her fuel gauge showed barely enough remaining for the return flight to their forward operating base, but 12 Americans were alive and heading home. The mission was over, but Ghost knew its impact would resonate through the military community for years to come. The after-action review took place in a secure conference room at MacDill Air Force Base, where senior officers from across the Special Operations community had gathered to analyze the Somalia mission. Ghost sat at the head of the table, her flight suit replaced by dress blues that bore the ribbons and decorations accumulated over a decade of military service. General Patricia Harrison, now the Air Force Chief of Staff, led the discussion with the same intensity that had made her a legendary figure in military aviation. Around the table sat representatives from every branch of the armed forces, their collective experience encompassing decades of special operations leadership. Ladies and gentlemen, Harrison began, the Somalia operation represents a watershed moment in close air support doctrine. 12 American personnel were extracted from an impossible tactical situation with 0 casualties and minimal collateral damage. The statistics that followed painted a picture of tactical excellence that exceeded all previous benchmarks. Ghost Squadron had engaged over 60 enemy positions during the 20-minute running battle, achieving a target destruction rate of 97%, while firing within 300 meters of friendly forces and civilian populations. Colonel Thorne, Admiral Richardson addressed her from across the table, your tactical innovation and leadership have redefined what's possible in urban close air support. The precision demonstrated by your pilots has set a new standard for joint operations. Ghost maintained her professional demeanor despite the pride swelling in her chest. Sir, my pilots performed exceptionally under extremely challenging conditions. Their training and dedication made the mission's success possible. The training programs you developed will now become standard curriculum at every close air support school in the military, General Harrison continued. Additionally, the 27th Squadron will be designated as the military's premier urban close air support unit, with expanded responsibilities and resources. The conversation that followed revealed the broader implications of the Somalia mission. Ghost's innovative tactics would be studied and replicated throughout the military, while her squadron would become the template for similar units in other services. The female pilot who'd been dismissed as a troublemaker had become the architect of a new era in military aviation. There's one more thing, Harrison said as the briefing concluded. Colonel Thorne, you're being promoted to full colonel and reassigned to the Pentagon as Director of Close Air Support Doctrine. You'll be responsible for implementing these innovations throughout the entire Air Force. The magnitude of the assignment struck Ghost like a physical blow. Pentagon assignments represented the pinnacle of military careers, positions that influenced policy and strategy at the highest levels of government. She'd earned the opportunity through combat performance rather than political connections, proving that merit could still triumph over bureaucracy. As the meeting dispersed, Ghost found herself reflecting on the remarkable journey that had brought her to this moment. The pilot who'd risked her career to save 8 Navy SEALs had become one of the most influential officers in the Air Force. 5 years later, Brigadier General Evelyn Ghost Thorne stood at the podium in the Pentagon's largest briefing room, addressing an audience of military leaders, defense contractors, and congressional staff members. The presentation she was about to deliver would outline the future of close air support for the next decade, incorporating lessons learned from operations around the globe. The Ghost who had once been invisible to her superiors now commanded attention at the highest levels of military and civilian leadership. Her innovations had been tested in combat from Somalia to Syria, from Afghanistan to the Pacific, consistently proving their effectiveness in saving American lives and accomplishing mission objectives. Ladies and gentlemen, Ghost began, her voice carrying the authority earned through years of combat leadership. Close air support has evolved from a supporting function to a decisive capability that shapes the outcome of ground operations. The briefing slides that followed documented the transformation of American military aviation, showing how precision-guided munitions, improved pilot training, and innovative tactics had revolutionized the battlefield. Ghost Squadron had served as the laboratory for these developments, their successes and failures providing the data necessary to refine new concepts. The 27th Squadron's operations have demonstrated that properly trained pilots, equipped with appropriate aircraft and weapons, can provide close air support in any environment, urban, desert, jungle, or mountain terrain, with unprecedented accuracy and minimal risk to civilian populations. The audience's questions revealed both genuine interest and professional skepticism. Congressional representatives wanted to know about costs and timeline for implementation. Senior military officers asked about training requirements and personnel impacts. Defense contractors inquired about new aircraft and weapons systems that might be required. Ghost answered each question with the same precision she'd once applied to target engagement, drawing upon her extensive combat experience and deep understanding of military aviation. The presentation concluded with unanimous approval for the expanded Close Air Support Program that would shape American military capabilities for decades to come. As the audience filed out of the briefing room, Ghost remained at the podium for a moment, contemplating the journey that had brought her from an underestimated captain to one of the Air Force's most senior leaders. The transformation hadn't been achieved through political maneuvering or bureaucratic success. It had come from a willingness to risk everything for the principle that American lives mattered more than regulations. The Ghost had finally found her voice, and the entire military was listening. The retirement ceremony took place on a clear autumn morning at Joint Base Andrews, with an honor guard drawn from all branches of the armed forces, and an audience that included some of the most distinguished military leaders of the past 2 decades. Major General Evelyn Ghost Thorne, promoted to her final rank 6 months earlier, stood at attention as the Air Force Chief of Staff prepared to deliver remarks that would close out a career spanning 24 years. The flag that had flown over the Pentagon during her tenure as Director of Close Air Support Doctrine was folded with military precision and presented to her by the same Master Chief Rodriguez, who had led the SEAL team she'd saved in Somalia 12 years earlier. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. Ghost's career had been defined by her willingness to risk everything for the lives of American warriors. Major General Thorne, General Harrison began, your service to this nation has redefined what it means to be a military aviator. You've demonstrated that courage isn't measured by the absence of fear, but by the willingness to act in spite of it. The citation that followed documented Ghost's accomplishments in clinical military language, but the statistics couldn't capture the human impact of her innovations. Over 1,000 American servicemen and women had returned home alive because of tactics she'd developed, aircraft modifications she'd championed, and training programs she'd implemented. As the ceremony concluded with the traditional flyover of A-10 Thunderbolts, Ghost reflected on the philosophy that had guided her throughout her military career. The sky had always been her sanctuary, a place where merit mattered more than politics and where skill could overcome prejudice. She'd proven that excellence had no gender, that leadership came from character rather than connections, and that sometimes the right decision required breaking the wrong rules. The reception that followed brought together hundreds of people whose lives had been touched by Ghost's service, pilots she'd trained, ground troops she'd protected, and senior officers whose respect she'd earned through performance rather than politics. Each conversation reinforced the same message. Her legacy would live on in the innovations she'd created and the lives she'd saved. As the sun set over the Maryland countryside, Ghost drove away from Joint Base Andrews for the final time as an active-duty officer. Her military career was over, but the impact of her service would continue to shape American military aviation for generations to come. The woman who had once been dismissed as a troublemaker had become a legend, proving that sometimes ghosts could cast the longest shadows. The lecture hall at the Air Force Academy was packed with cadets whose wide eyes reflected a mixture of nervousness and excitement. Before them stood a legend, Major General Evelyn Ghost Thorne, retired, whose exploits had become the stuff of military folklore in the 5 years since she